Does in this presentation class, does Israel operate at the level of first first Maccabees rather than at the level of second Maccabees? First Maccabees is written in Hebrew, and second Maccabees is written in Alexandria by diasporic Jews and written in Greek. So I'll be drawing on, just to give a footnote on Daniel Schwartz's analysis of the content of these two books. And he's a professor who has recently made translations of these books. So the difference is the difference between the Second Temple and the atmosphere of the Second Temple as we get from all the standard sources, inscriptions, and whatever's come down to us, and the archaeology, and everything. But we get us in a special form, which is very pronounced but because we can contrast it so directly between First and Second Maccabees, even though they're not actually sequels. They address quite different things, and then maybe in a certain sense they've been put together arbitrarily, but nonetheless, there's a certain, they're written in the same time period, and Alexander died in 323 BC, and then his empire split up, and and it's sort of split halfway between where Jerusalem is in the center, between the two sides, which were hundreds of years later from that time here. But originally it had been granted to some Ptolemy and to some generals of Alexander. But then the great center of learning, which is by rumor, and there's in the midst of all the papyrus scrolls, Alexander's sarcophagus was interned in however the right word is. Usually it's said that the Septuagint, which operated here in the Great Library of Alexandria, or the tomb of Alexander, who of course was a personal student of Aristotle, we get a Septuagint is actually, many of them are Jews. So it's usually it's passed off as though, oh, why is this book it's not done in the style of the Pentateuch? Why is this book is broken up into First and Second Samuel or whatever? And then it's because there's a translations made by the Septuagint, and that's the way they did it. And then there's these 4 books called the Books of Maccabee that are all put together in a similar time, because they were from a roughly similar time, and somebody organized them that way as a sort of shelving organization in some sense, but in another sense they have some content. And then we see that Judaism, and there's other evidences, but Judaism began as a diasporic ideology, if you like. To say it's when Jews no longer had self-rule. But of course, it happened sort of overlapping, so there was still self-rule um, and that's the point of Hanukkah. Hanukkah has to do with this. It was probably written by the people that this ruling family that resulted from Judas Maccabee's victory and so on probably wanted something written to justify it, or at least to explain it. But in any case, the interesting thing is in the Second Temple cult, where the high Cohen or the high priest is also the head of state, and where Jews were basically, so they were autonomous in the limited sense that I think the Syrian potentate of the Seleucid Empire, they call it, who had been a descendant of one of Alexander's generals, was called Epiphanes, and was considered insane and also called Epimanes. And who also had a curious trait that he liked to go among the commoners and pass himself off as a commoner. And partially, maybe this was partially one of the reasons they thought he was, because Epiphanes is like the apparition of the ghost, the appearance of the god. Whereas Epimanes is like Manus is like the word in mens rea, it's like out of your mind, crazy. So at that time, the basic attitude, even though the Jews were under this higher king, like in a province sort of, and that he thought it was useful to have this already established cult with the head priest as the sort of the local governor. So he allowed it to continue. Nonetheless, they had sort of limited autonomy. And then you see in the text, it's always like there's some evil people, bad people. We're doing well. They don't like it that we're doing well. And that's why they sometimes harm us. And they're evil. And this is the basic attitude of sort of like, but so you notice this is sort of the attitude of Netanyahu is sort of similar to this attitudes of the high Cohen. Whereas you look at that's First Maccabee, and also in First Maccabees there's no theory of, you get it everywhere in the King James Bible. You get like the man Moses. You get this phrase which is taken by the Septuagint. And then you see it in Second Maccabees, because it's written in Greek in Alexandria, and it can be expressed also in Hebrew, but it doesn't exist in Hebrew. But it's this notion of that Leo Strauss calls a man as man, but you see it right in Second Maccabees where they're saying, and the man was killed, and it's sort of like it signals. One, the reception of the in Judaism of Plato and the cult of Plato from the Library of Alexandria, and which is the same issue again as this Exodus passage. I am that I am in the King James version, and that's the Platonic version, and it's deliberately there, and it's not a lack of scholarship that they did it. They knew. But there's also the Hebrew version, the Old Hebrew version, which is more faithfully thought to be translated as "I shall be that I shall be." It's like Asher, I Asher. And then you see in the they asked in Judaism, in contradistinction to the Second Temple cult, which is like that of Netanyahu, And therefore I'm saying it's not a matter of time in the same way that it would seem to be, that this ancient morals have suddenly shown up again. Classical ancient morals. There's another stage back beyond that, the time of Samuel and Saul. But that's 1,000 years earlier. And King David and so on. But you get in Judaism, you get this attitude like, oh, most of the foreigners, they're well disposed towards us, and most of the time they treat us pretty well. And there's this idea of man as man, and we're going to stand up for that. And sometimes it gets, the only times it gets messed with is sometimes when Richard the Lionheart goes away to the Crusades or something. He's gone. Then this wicked Constable John or whatever comes in, or his son or whatever, Trump Jr. comes in, or maybe it's Hegseth or something, but not the king himself would never do this. I suppose that doesn't fit the current situation in America well. But nonetheless, there's this sort of Judaism takes this attitude of the position of somebody in the diaspora who has to sort of believe that. So I'm just sort of largely just paraphrasing what Schwartzman says about the difference between the first and second Maccabees and what it says. But I'm just adding that if you apply it, it seems like it's explanatory for how Netanyahu and A200 operate. Then we should remember this high priest, Netanyahu, as it were, High Cohen, is deep into a lot of tech issues, right? I mean, we had the thing about the pagers, but there's all kinds of other things, like that they could, they find new ways of hacking and everything like that. It's all kinds of things. That whole thing about the lavender scores, that people are given different scores, it's sort of like what they have in China, except it's more like a death warrant if you get beyond a certain point. This social rating scores, all kinds of things we can't really guess at. So taken that way, it's interesting to look at the sense of time as a function of moral conditions. So it's like, just to make it quick, just to give this some flavor, because it doesn't have that much salt, but let's just add Nietzsche a little bit. And Nietzsche says, of course, famously, jenseits von Gut und Böse, beyond good and evil. But then actually what he does is he says, we won't have good and böse, but we'll have good and schlecht, because there has to be, so good and bad, he thinks, is where you shame people. Good and evil. He thinks when you say somebody's evil, then you shame them, I suppose. Cannibalism is supposed to be shameful. Pedophilia is supposed to be shameful. Good and evil. But when you only have the good and schlecht, or the good and bad, then what you do is you either, recognizing that something's lower or defective, you then either pity it or you have contempt for it. But his point is, we all the time recognize some things as pitiable or defective or contemptible. and therefore we all the time put forward some version of good and bad and a hierarchy of it. And then he's saying, yeah, God is dead, which means there's nobody's really telling us what this full hierarchy of good and schlecht is, and therefore it has to be formed in some way, like a play or like a paideia or a game. But it has that necessity that one wants to prepare one's children to have some kind of sense of what it is that they actually have to deal with. So that Nietzsche presents a lot of, especially in the Zarathustra, there's sort of a condensed teaching of it, but it's in other places too. He presents a case which shows how necessary something is to have this type of, in a way, paideia, the early Greek word for education of the early young. It means sort of things that are you do voluntarily, or sort of like it's like just play. It's a free play of the children, but it's part of their earliest education. Or which is to say, there's some, blocks with the letters on them or something. There's something that it's sort of like it's sort of play, but it's also the early building blocks of education, paideia. That because there is education, then all these questions of the life-giving lie and all these many other questions are directly demanded of everyone. So that Nietzsche's whole teaching has this direct seriousness in it. Then one would have to ask, is such a thought, how so far does such a thought, such thoughts as if we have this thought of the first and second Maccabees and the difference there, and Netanyahu, and then it brings up a question about what is the nature of time in some sense, and how so far can these things be deranged as a matter of thought and analysis about something that somebody could think was a good idea insofar as a council could actually regard as thinking it's good doxa or something that should be acted upon.